Think about the last time you wanted something badly. Not a small thing. Something you worked toward, planned for, waited for. A promotion, a trip, finishing a project that took months, getting something you told yourself would change things. And then you got it. And something strange happened, not immediately, maybe a few hours later or the next morning. The thing you wanted was there. You had it. And instead of the satisfaction you expected, there was something quieter, flatter, a kind of "is that it?" that you didn't expect and couldn't quite explain. You weren't ungrateful. You weren't being difficult. You experienced one of the most consistent and least discussed features of how the human brain actually works. The neuroscience has a name for it, and understanding it changes not just how you think about motivation, but how you understand the way your brain has been running you without telling you. What dopamine actually is and what it isn't. Dopamine is probably the most misunderstood chemical in popular neuroscience. The version most people know goes something like this. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. You do something good, dopamine is released, you feel pleasure. More dopamine equals more happiness. This is why drugs, sugar, and social media are addictive. They flood the brain with dopamine. Almost none of this is accurate. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan spent decades investigating what dopamine actually does, and what he found fundamentally changed the field's understanding of motivation and reward. Berridge and his colleagues discovered that the brain has two distinct systems that are commonly conflated: a wanting system and a liking system. The wanting system, driven primarily by dopamine, is responsible for motivation, craving, and the drive to pursue a goal. The liking system, driven by opioids and other mechanisms, is responsible for the actual experience of pleasure when a reward is received. These two systems are neurologically separate, and they can operate completely independently of each other. You can want something intensely and not like it when you get it. You can like something without particularly wanting it. The drive to pursue a goal and the satisfaction of achieving it are processed by different brain systems, and dopamine is in charge of only one of them. Why the wanting feels better than the having. In the 1990s, neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz at Cambridge University made a discovery that reframed everything. Schultz was studying dopamine neurons in primates, tracking when they fired. The assumption going in was that dopamine neurons would fire when the animal received a reward, a food pellet, a juice reward. Pleasure, then dopamine. What he found was different. The dopamine neurons fired not when the reward arrived, but when the signal predicting the reward appeared. The cue, the anticipation. The moment the brain recognized that something good was coming. When the reward actually arrived, on cue as expected, the dopamine neurons showed almost no response. The reward itself barely registered. What had registered was the prediction that the reward was coming. This is the discovery that reshaped modern neuroscience's understanding of dopamine. It is not a pleasure chemical. It is a prediction and anticipation chemical. It fires for the wanting, not the having. For the chased, not the catch. And this has a specific implication that most people have never been told. The neurological peak of any goal is not the moment of achievement. It is the moment when achievement first feels possible and certain. Everything after that, including the achievement itself, is from the dopamine system's perspective, a resolution rather than a reward. The arrival fallacy. Psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar coined a term for the experiential version of what Schultz's neurons were showing: the arrival fallacy. The arrival fallacy is the belief that achieving a goal will produce lasting satisfaction, that arrival at the destination will feel as good as the anticipation of getting there. It almost never does. Ben-Shahar studied high achievers, Olympic athletes, Harvard students, people who had accomplished exactly what they set out to accomplish, and found a consistent pattern. The achievement produced a brief spike of satisfaction, followed by a rapid return to baseline, often accompanied by a surprising flatness or even mild depression. The destination arrived. The dopamine system, no longer anticipating, went quiet. What makes this particularly significant is that the arrival fallacy is not a character flaw. It is not ingratitude or an inability to appreciate what you have. It is the predictable output of a neurological system that evolved to keep you moving toward goals, not to reward you richly when you reach them. A brain that flooded with pleasure upon achieving a goal would be a brain that stopped pursuing the next one. Evolution had no use for that brain. The dopamine system is designed to keep the horizon moving. Satisfaction is temporary by design. The planning paradox. Research by neuroscientist Gregory Berns at Emory University found something that illustrates this perfectly. Berns studied the brain activity of subjects anticipating a reward, specifically a small amount of juice delivered at a predictable time. The anticipation itself activated the dopamine system. Subjects reported the anticipation as pleasurable. But more striking was a separate finding. The brain's reward circuitry activated more strongly during the planning and anticipation of a vacation than during the vacation itself. The trip, once actually happening, produced less dopamine-related activity than the weeks of looking forward to it. This is why the planning of a holiday is often more enjoyable than the holiday. Why the weeks before a major event feel charged with energy that the event itself sometimes doesn't match. The brain is running its dopamine system at full capacity during anticipation, and throttling it back once arrival makes further anticipation unnecessary. What this means for how you've been living. The implications of this research are wider than they might first appear. Every goal you've pursued, everything you've told yourself will make you happy when you get it, has been processed by a system that was always going to deliver its peak experience before you arrived. The drive, the planning, the progress, the almost there. These are when the dopamine system is most active. The arrival is neurologically an ending rather than a climax. This is not pessimism. It is not an argument that goals are pointless or that achievement doesn't matter. It is a description of how motivation actually works and why the experience of achievement so often feels different from what you imagined it would. Understanding the distinction between wanting and liking, between the dopamine system and the opioid system, changes the question you ask yourself about what you're pursuing and why. The dopamine system will always push you toward the next horizon. The question is whether what you're pursuing, when you actually have it, is something your liking system values, not just your wanting system. Most people spend their lives chasing what their dopamine system wants. Far fewer ask what their liking system actually enjoys. Kent Berridge, reflecting on decades of research into wanting and liking, has described the dopamine system as the brain's motor of desire, a system that generates motivation and craving with extraordinary power, but that has almost nothing to do with whether what is desired will actually feel good when it arrives. The motor keeps running. It always finds a new destination. That is what it evolved to do. The question the research leaves open, and that Berridge himself has raised, is whether the destinations the dopamine system chooses are the ones that the rest of the brain actually values. and whether most people ever stop moving long enough to find out. The flatness after the achievement was not ingratitude. The "is that it" was not a sign that something was wrong with you, or that the goal was wrong, or that you don't know how to be happy. It was a dopamine system doing exactly what it evolved to do, generating the drive to reach the goal and then quietly redirecting toward the next one before you'd fully registered that you'd arrived. The wanting was real. The drive was real. The work was real. The brain just never told you that the peak was always going to be somewhere before the finish line. Mind translator. Psychology translated clearly.